Welcome to Season 2 of Garth and Sue Talk, a series by Psych Sessions where we bring up a topic of conversation and then we just riff. These are the water cooler conversations that you have with colleagues in your department. These are the chats you might have at the bar after a good day at a teaching conference. So please, pull up a seat as we talk about teaching. Sue, welcome back. We have a special one today.
We sure do. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, well, let's give people the backstory here because you and I put out this first season of Garth and Sue Talk. Always nice to refer to ourselves in third person. We heard from somebody who had listened to an episode about interteaching and just said, hey, thanks for that. I have some questions about how to implement it. And that person, I should acknowledge, is right on the is on the recording with us right now. That person was Catherine Ortner from Thompson Rivers University. And she reached out to you, had some questions, and then you told me about it. And I said, well, let's get her on. Let's talk through this stuff. And you thought it was a good idea, right? I can say that with confidence.
Yeah, I thought it was a good idea. We'll do this recording and then we'll see if I still think that.
Well, I know that you and I love to talk about teaching. And so to bring somebody else in, one of the things I loved about this idea was that this is what we do. We have ideas and then we have to figure out how, or we hear ideas and then we have to figure out how do they apply into our course. So, hey, Catherine, welcome. You are our very first guest ever on this little segment that Sue and I have created. So welcome.
Well, thank you. I am really honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me to ask some questions about interteaching.
Lovely, lovely. And you are, did I say that you're in Kamloops, British Columbia?
That is correct. I'm in Kamloops and our university and where I live is actually, I should mention, on the unceded territory of the Secwepemc people. And it's a wonderful, wonderful place to live and work.
I love it. I love it. And before we started recording, Sue and I simultaneously, because we're that connected, took sips of water out of our Tip Northwest cups. And this is going somewhere. Teaching Introductory Psychology Northwest. Oh, yeah. Timing is everything here. Yeah. And you're in our region. So I'm not sure if you knew about Teaching Introductory Psychology Northwest, but it's a conference that we hold in the Seattle area every single spring, usually April. And we'll be making an announcement soon. So about a virtual conference that we'll be doing this year, of course. But I hope that we might be able to see you in person someday. That'd be kind of fun. All right. Well, let's get into this because interteaching is this great thing. Sue and I swear by it. We love it. We think it solves a whole lot of problems. And maybe you could just tell us real quick, where are you at with your understanding of interteaching, just so we can get, before we jump into kind of your course specifically or questions you have, you can kind of tell us, like, where did you first learn about it? How did you hear our conversation about it? Wherever you want to go.
I think I probably first heard about interteaching, I don't know, maybe a year or so ago on the Society for Teaching of Psychology Facebook page, which is probably one of the only reasons I am now still on Facebook. And so that is also how I ended up first hearing about your Psych Sessions podcast. And then I got so excited when I heard about, I was actually on parental leave at the time, but I had been thinking about wanting to change how I teach because I was one of those very traditional stand up and lecture kind of instructors and getting a bit bored of hearing myself speak, to be honest. And I think the students must have been too. So I was quite determined I wanted to apply it this year. And then when the pandemic struck, I thought, wow, this is maybe a chance for me just to pivot and go to interteaching because I cannot imagine, delivering 3-hour lectures every week online. That would be terrible. And so I just kind of jumped into it this summer and had my first go at interteaching this fall. So that was my first run at it. And it wasn't a complete disaster, but there's definitely lots of room for improvement, I think.
So you did it online, right?
I did it online, and it was, fully online, but I had both synchronous and asynchronous options for students. Yeah. And so now I'm looking at my winter semester, and, it went well enough that I'm convinced I want to do it again. And I don't think I'll ever go back to how I was teaching before. But I have some things that I need to work on and improve.
Okay, before I hand it over to Sue to ask a couple questions, let me just ask some preliminary things, which are, other than that Facebook, that thread that maybe mentioned it, where did you go to after that to kind of figure out how to implement it?
There was, what did I go? Well, there were two sort of key little articles that got me started. One of them was actually Sue's, I think it was at a blog post, Shifting Responsibility. That one was amazing. And then there was one through APS, a little article, sort of the 10 things about interteaching. And those got me started. And then I delved a little bit into some of the research literature as well. And then I must say as well, I have a colleague here who's actually in the geography department. And I told her about it. And we spent our summer, every Sunday mornings, we would go running and talk about our plans for interteaching, because she tried it out for the first time this fall as well. Yeah.
Cool.
And is she game to continue it in winter also?
She absolutely is, yes, but also planning to make some changes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I've learned about any kind of course redesign is that you're never done. You just you change something, and sometimes something major, and then you learn what worked and what didn't, and then you're just tweaking. So I think that's where we're at today. Sue, when she's sharing, is there anything else that any other questions or any other thoughts that you had? And well, your dog's going to answer for you, I guess.
He has opinions. He definitely has opinions.
Okay, Sue's going to run out for a moment. So what course, and you may have said this and I may have missed it, what course were you teaching in fall?
It was psychiatric clinical disorders, which is basically our upper level version of abnormal psych. So we don't cover all the topics from abnormal psych, but just a subset from them in that class. Yeah.
Okay. And I would say I've used this for 100 and 200 level classes. I think it works great for both. And for you, you're saying it works for upper level undergraduate classes as well. I guess we should, I think I would just personally like to understand, what do you think worked well in that? And we don't have to spend all the time kind of looking backward, but what did you really like about interteaching? And then let's start there. What did you really like about it?
What I really liked about it was the level of engagement that I saw from the students, and that they also reported back to me that they were experiencing. And we've never had students sort of send me random emails in the middle of the semester saying, hey, I really liked that assignment last week. Those were some really good questions. Because usually they just write the exam and then they move on and try to forget about it. Whereas they were reporting back that they were really engaged, and I could feel that as well. So that was what I liked most about it, and that I think was going well.
And what were these questions that the students were talking about? Like, what did they like, and how was it different from what you were doing before?
I think, so the kinds of questions I was using in my weekly assignments with interteaching was, I went sort of with the higher level blooms, because the course material, there are some things that they struggle a little bit to understand, and where I'd want them to demonstrate that they could explain a particular concept and say, give an example. But a lot of it, I was going beyond that and more trying to getting into the synthesize, create, and apply, and so on. And so I think they were liking that depth of engagement and having time to really engage with those questions on multiple occasions, both before having the discussion, and then during the discussion, and then during the clarifying lecture, and then during the opportunity they had to then revise their answers. So I think there's multiple opportunities to engage in these whereas if you do that on an exam, they've got 10 minutes to answer the question and then they move on, and they're not really getting into it as deeply as they could otherwise.
Yeah. And if somebody's listening right now and they don't know what we're talking about, I don't think we're going to re-explain exactly what interteaching is here. So go to the earlier episode, season 1, where Sue and I discuss interteaching, and then you can jump back into this conversation. So yeah, so that multiple exposures to that to those questions and that material is really engaging, and it's my experience too that students really like it. Okay, so what are you struggling with now that you have, or what questions do you have, or what didn't work for you on your first run through?
There are a couple of areas where I'm struggling a bit, how I'm going to do things this winter. One is just thinking about the discussion and how to have students get the most out of the discussion and how to have them engaged in the discussion. So the way I did it last semester, because I want to do the same again next semester, is have both synchronous options where they can show up and they'll go into breakout rooms for the discussion. And then I also had an asynchronous option for discussion where I used Mattermost, which is a little bit like Slack. I don't know if you're familiar with those kinds of tools. Rather than using Moodle, which is our learning system, I used this Mattermost thing, and they could discuss on there. But some students were saying, a couple of things that came up. One is they would say, well, I've got these other 4 people in my breakout room, but 2 of them just kind of said hello at the beginning, and then they disappeared. We didn't hear from them anymore. We don't know if they were even still at their computer. So that was one thing that happened. And another thing that was happening was a couple of people said, and I don't know how common this is because you don't get feedback from everybody, right? But some people are saying, I really just thought the discussion was a waste of time. I didn't get anything out of it. I felt like if I was participating in the asynchronous discussion, there was a lot of pressure just to say something, even though I didn't feel like I had anything to say. And so I was thinking about trying to come up with some more explicit instructions of, this is what you must do in the discussion, and trying to be more clear about how to proceed and what my expectations were. But I'd love to hear if you have suggestions here for how to kind of ensure they participate.
Okay, one of the things I love about where this conversation is going is that neither Sue nor I do synchronous discussions in our courses. And so this is going to be us kind of leaning on our experience of trying a bunch of different things in asynchronous and face-to-face courses to talk about that engagement piece, which is the mid piece of interteaching, right? So you have the individual effort that goes in, and then you have the community kind of building and kind of students running their answers by other students and picking up on that. So Sue, synchronous discussion groups have kind of a various or different students, from what I'm hearing, are engaging differently and valuing it differently. What do we think?
Yeah, and that's the same thing that everybody struggles with having any kind of in-class discussion. On the plus side, with interteaching, you already have a set of questions that students ideally have put some thought into before they come to class, although we should acknowledge that just because you ask students to do it, and even if there are points attached, it does not mean that all students will come to class prepared. So, when I teach this class face-to-face, I have the students submit their assignments. So they submit the answers to their questions about a couple hours before we're actually due to have class. So that way I can see who's got it done and who doesn't have it done. And then of the students who all have it done, I randomly divide them into groups. And then the students who don't have it done, I drop one into each of those groups. And when I first did this, I took everybody who didn't have it done and I put them in their own groups. And I realized my mistake fairly quickly because that just normalized it for them. It's like, oh, I don't have it done. None of you have it done. I guess we don't really have to do this. And we're all going to lose points. And apparently that's okay. So I decided, no, I'm a social psychologist. I know better than this. And so that's when I went for the peer pressure and dropping the students who didn't have it done into the groups where everybody else had it done. So at least everybody who was there in the group, let's say the group had 4 or 5 people in it, 3 or 4 would be able to have a discussion of some kind about this. So there's that part of it. Then there's the part of, well, what do we talk about? Well, since how I do interteaching is the students answer these questions and then they have the option to revise any questions a week later, most of the students are fairly motivated to have some discussion about the content. Some students are way more comfortable saying, I don't understand this question. I don't know that what I put down is right. And other students are like, I don't want to admit that I have no idea what is going on here. And so they just shut up. So they want to listen in on the conversation. They want to partake in it. They want to receive from the conversation, but they don't necessarily have the confidence to produce anything. So part of the challenge, I think, is in helping students become more comfortable with saying, I don't know, or I don't understand. And I don't have any magic ways of doing that other than modeling it. That when students ask me a question and I can say, beats me, I don't know. If I had to guess, I would say it's this because of X, Y, and Z, but I really don't know.
Catherine, would you say that the challenges in kind of Zoom discussion groups around they're discussing the questions, right? That they've already answered. Would you say that there's anything different about the Zoom format than the traditional like small group format face to face that Sue is talking about, or does what she's saying really relevant to your student situation?
I think it is really relevant. One of the differences, and I don't know if this makes really too much difference, but a lot of my students didn't want to unmute themselves and, put their videos on and everything. And I didn't want to require that either for many reasons. So I allowed them, if they wanted, they could just type in the chat. And I have mixed feelings about that, having a discussion where you're just typing in the chat, then you may as well be asynchronous, I sort of think. But then other people have said, but, they're so used to being on their phones that for them it's really fast and that's how they communicate. So I think that might make a little bit of a difference, but ultimately I think those are really, I think there's a lot of similarity in many ways, and I really hear your point, Sue, about students not being comfortable saying I don't know, and sometimes they maybe don't know that they don't know, or they don't know how to ask what they don't know about, and I'm hesitant to start too much attaching points to their level of participation in the discussion, because one thing that happened this semester, I had a student who had a lot of social anxiety, and she, by the end of the semester, actually did participate in the discussion through typing in the chat. But she reported to me the only way she was able to do that was because there wasn't pressure. She felt this level of comfort that she was able to finally get to that level of engagement. And I think, wow, for that one success, it was kind of worth it, even if a few people just kind of disappeared out of the picture. But at the same time, I've sort of been thinking, well, should I put them in pairs maybe, and then have them rate their partner? And then if they really don't want to do that, they could do the asynchronous discussion, right? I don't know.
Yeah, this is really interesting. So the students, they're on the same course, but they have the choice to either be a part of the synchronous or the asynchronous format. Well, maybe I could ask you, in the asynchronous format, how are you replacing this experience? Is it discussion boards?
So this is where I was using Mattermost, which is a little bit like Slack. And so, they had the questions that they knew they were going to be trying to answer. And I didn't really give explicit guidelines about how they should post on Mattermost or how much they should post. I just kind of let them go with it, because I decided if they showed some level of engagement on there, they would get some points for participation. And similarly, if they had shown up to the synchronous session, they would get some basic points for participation. I had sort of these exit tickets at the end of the discussion as well, where they would, of course, give me feedback and say what they needed help with still.
Which is part of the interteaching process, right? Is getting that feedback after the discussion groups. I'm sure other processes use it as well. But okay, so the goal is that students are learning from one another, that they are kind of vetting their answers because they have a revision coming, and that they are hearing from others. And so I'll just pose the question to the two of you. And it came up, I think, Catherine, when you were originally talking about this, which is, how specific are we supposed to be with students about exactly how the discussion should go, versus kind of just leaving it, whether synchronously or asynchronously, kind of up to them to figure out how to get what they need out of it. So let me throw that to, I don't know, whoever. Sue, you want to have an opinion? I know you have an opinion.
I always have an opinion. Sometimes it's informed, sometimes not. I think in this case, it's not informed. I think about ultimately where students are going to end up. So students are going to graduate from college. They're going to go into some kind of workplace where they're going to have to work as part of a team. Even as academics, that we still have committee work, which is really ultimately teamwork. And some committees work better as teams than other committees do. So I think one of our responsibilities is helping students gain some skill in working as a team, and I think that's one of the guidelines for the major, right? One of the student learning outcomes in Guidelines 3.0. So then the question becomes, how do we help students move along? And Catherine, I love the story about your student with social anxiety who was able to move along. And I think that because you are giving students the option of asynchronous or synchronous, and in a workplace, a lot of workplaces right now have gone to platforms like Slack, which is largely text-based. Others are using Zoom right now. And someday we're all going to be face-to-face again. So the more experience students have with discussions and trying to figure out, and I think, Garth, you and I had an episode about this where you have to go into a meeting with some idea in mind as to where the meeting is going to go. So if nothing else, students should at least have some information about where they should end up at the end. And with the interteaching questions, students should have it in their heads that at the end, I should have better answers to my questions, or I should feel more confident in each of my answers. And if I don't, I need to tell the group, okay, and if you guys can't help me out with this, then I get to go to the instructor and have the instructor explain this. But ultimately, it's students' responsibility to say, I know this or I don't know this. And maybe that might be one approach to it, actually, is to ask students at the end of the discussion to write a confidence level for each of their answers. How confident are you now in the answer that you have? How confident are you in answer number 2? Or if you're going to revise it, how confident are you that you're going to be able to do a good revision? So it forces students into some reflection. So it isn't just, oh my God, I am having a discussion with people I don't know what to say. They're going to think I'm stupid. Instead, it becomes focused on, what do I know and what don't I know?
Yeah, I think the fact, now I may be missing something here, but I think my opinion would be that because you are offering the asynchronous option, that you can demand a lot as far as requirements and give a lot of details for the synchronous options. Like, if you're going to be here, then this is how I'd like you to be here. With that end in mind. And this is why, obviously, students, that I'd like you to be doing these things. And I know that there's a whole lot of conversation around, asking students to turn on video, asking students to engage synchronously. And I'm sure there's tons of merit to that. But because they have the out, I think I would be, I would want my students to engage in a particular way. I mean, the way maybe I would do it would be to tell them, and maybe switching it up each time we meet or something like that, to say, all right, today, the first thing I want everybody to do is to go into your groups and everybody do a think, pair, share kind of thing where you're asking them to think about what they're going to share ahead of time before you actually ask them to do it. And get that foot in the door and try to maybe just kind of scaffold it along. Yeah, Sue.
Catherine, is it possible for your students to do both the asynchronous and the synchronous?
Yes, and I didn't plan it that way, but some people did. Yeah. Yeah. Because sometimes as well, they would participate synchronously and then they would carry on asynchronously afterwards, or the other way around, or yeah.
Given that they can do both, I'm with Garth. I think that you can probably hold a high standard on the synchronous discussions, assuming they can still earn full points by participating in the asynchronous. So for your student with social anxiety, then that becomes easy. So I'm going to participate asynchronously over here, but I'm going to challenge myself. I'm going to work on my social anxiety, and I'm going to drop in on these synchronous discussions, and we'll see how that goes. But no points are riding on the synchronous for that student because they can pick them all up through asynchronous.
Yeah, so Catherine, what we may be just swinging and missing here. So how's this sounding to you?
This is wonderful, actually. It's really, really helpful. It's really helping me sort of think about what's important of what they're going to get out of this. And it's super helpful. I really appreciate these insights. Yeah, and I think that way, given that they have both options, and then they can choose. That makes sense to be able to up the requirements a bit for the synchronous.
What kind of specific things would you want? Ideally, let's think about, there are going to be students who are uncomfortable with putting their video cameras on and whatever. In your ideal world, how would you like these discussions to go? What kind of specific guidelines do you think you'd put in there for synchronous discussions?
I was actually making some notes on this the other day. I was just going to, last time I had given them some very general prompts and for how to start the conversation, like what to say, and so now I've even spelled those out more clearly, and just little things that to me seem obvious, but maybe they don't to the student, so I'm not sure what Catherine is getting at for this concept. This is what I think, but did you interpret it that way, or did you interpret it differently? And then I was also going to spell out for them how they could give feedback to each other, to give constructive feedback, or if they don't understand what somebody said, how they could phrase that in a way that doesn't intimidate or feel too critical to the other person. So I had spelled out some suggestions for how you could give feedback in response to people's comments.
I love that. I absolutely love that. It's I think one of the hardest things for us to do as instructors is to take something that we've become so accustomed to and we know so well, and to walk back to a time when we didn't have that, when we didn't know that, and imagine, okay, if I didn't have that skill of how to have a discussion about this kind of content, how would I do it? So I love that you're giving students language to start with that they can practice with. I think that's great.
Now, I've been talking to some male faculty in particular who have noticed that it's often particular students who are the first to jump in the conversation and have their voice heard, and often those are male students. But whether they're male students or not, there are certain students who are going to be the ones who talk a lot. And I don't think this. I think this is probably in kind of a Zoom room conversation or in the classroom. Do you think it's worth, Catherine, putting in some rules about how much people should plan to engage and when they should not?
That's a really good idea. I hadn't even thought about that. I mean, I've certainly observed that as well, that there are people who are more vocal and who just naturally feel more comfortable. And so then it's easy for others to sit back. And I know, for example, myself as an introvert, I would be the one that would let everybody else speak first. And then you get into a particular habit. I mean, the one thing I was thinking was, changing groups every week so that they can't get into a particular habit with a certain group of people. But I think that's a nice idea to maybe put some specific guidance as well about how to ensure that everyone has a chance to participate. I'm not sure what exactly I would say, but
Sue, have you done anything like that?
Putting guidelines on how much someone, well, in a face-to-face, it's easier. because you can stand at the front of the room and you can see, oh yeah, that person is talking a lot again, and to go over and specifically ask other people, so what did you think about whatever, and to break up the dynamic a little bit. I know some instructors assign roles to students. So one student is, I forget what they're all called, but one student is essentially the monitor, the person who makes sure that everybody has an opportunity to say something. So if one person is speaking a lot, if Garth is speaking a lot, then if I'm the monitor, I would say, Catherine, can you offer your perspective on this? So somebody is specifically tasked with that. Other people assign a recorder to a group. So that's the person who is noting what the group is deciding, for instance. In this particular case, it could be that the recorder is noting how much time each person is speaking. So that person could give feedback to the group afterwards, making sure that, in this particular time, so-and-so was speaking an awful lot. So maybe next time this group meets that we don't do that. I'm really divided on having groups be the same throughout and randomly mixing them up each time. I don't have any good answers to that. I know that some students tend to be more of a challenge in groups than others, and so I would prefer that they be distributed across the rest of the class, so that a particular group, for instance, doesn't decide we're not going to come to class anymore because we just cannot stand this person. On the other hand, I could see a group learning to manage that person, that they would be able to say, hey, you're talking too much. Time for somebody else to say something. They'd be more likely to do that maybe once they get to know them a little bit and discover that they can say that. So I don't have any good answers for that one.
I want to mention something. There's a book out there called Teaching Race by Stephen Brookfield, and in something like the 10th chapter, he edits the book, but he writes this chapter on having hard conversations, group conversations, and he gives all of these different strategies for having group conversations. And of course, they're related to teaching race, but I thought to myself, wow, these are really good just for like, as far as skill building for students. And like one of them was taking an amount of time, like a minute or 2 minutes, and having students share in order for a minute. Like, so everybody gets a chance to share. So if you have 4 people in the group, everybody takes 2 minutes or 1 minute or whatever and shares on the topic. And then after that, they can't be interrupted. They have to share. And then after that, it can become an organic conversation. But at the beginning, we make sure that everybody gets to share for Interteaching, what they wrote down during that, or for those answers to those questions. So there are some opportunities or some options that are out there for sure. And people have thought about this a lot more than I have. Catherine, maybe, do you have any final thoughts about kind of group conversations, or do you feel like you have a direction?
Yeah, definitely lots of things to think about. I think those are some wonderful ideas, actually. Thank you.
All right. And what else, when you think about your interteaching experience and your upcoming interteaching experience, so engagement was a big one. By the way, Sue uses discussion posts in her asynchronous online course. I use Flipgrid for engagement in my asynchronous online course. Did I see asynchronous for you? Both asynchronous online courses, which I think we both like. And so what else is there that you are thinking about?
One thing I'm deliberating over a bit is the writing requirements. So I followed the model that I think Sue talked about in the in that blog post that you wrote, Sue, where you have students sort of do a first draft of their answers prior to coming and submit that first draft. And I use that process, giving them sort of points for showing good faith effort. But students complained Not all of them, but a decent proportion of them said there was too much writing, to be doing that. And I don't think it was because I asked them each week to report how many hours they were working on the course. And at the very end of the class, I just got some general feedback about, on average, how many hours per week did you work on this class for, counting everything that you did. And it didn't seem over the top. But I think what they were struggling with was it meant they had multiple things to submit, because every Monday they would have to submit their first draft for that week, as well as their final submission from the week before. And by the way, I also had them do just some very short multiple choice quizzes on the learning management system every week, just to sort of, because as I said, the questions were getting at the higher order blooms, and I just wanted to get a sense of, just basic understanding of concepts through multiple choice as well. So it was a lot for them to submit every week. And so I was thinking about doing away with that first draft, but I'm worried that they won't engage with the questions enough, and that then they'll come to the discussion and it's like, well, I looked at these questions, but I really haven't thought about them enough yet. And then, so I'm really not sure how to manage the writing for them. Yeah.
Yep. Oh man. Yes. Of course. I think Sue and I have talked about this before, where it is so hard to have the students try to understand that this is the entire week's assignment, or however long that entire process is on that one content area, or whatever that what I call a module, that it's all one thing. And I don't think Interteaching works without you doing those preliminary questions. And we're definitely not like capitalizing on what we know about spaced practice if we're not doing that. Sue?
Yeah, definitely don't go away from the first draft. I think mostly this ends up being a marketing thing. So if what your students are reporting, because you're on the semester system, so for a 3-credit class that presumably meets, if it were face-to-face, it would meet 3 hours a week, yes? Then students need to be spending 6 hours outside of class. So as long as students are reporting that they are spending 5 to 7 hours each week working on the assignment, then that's not problematic at all. That's exactly what they should be spending. The problem is essentially a PR problem. So students who are accustomed to sitting in on a lecture, and some students have gotten very good at sitting in on lectures and taking notes or not taking notes. And then they are very good at taking multiple choice tests. So the amount that they have to study is actually fairly minimal. So for those students, it feels like they're doing a lot of work in comparison to just, let me take a multiple choice test. And it's because they are. But we also know that they're going to remember much more in the long run as a result of having done this, and their depth of knowledge is going to be much greater. So it's absolutely worth it. Now, how to convince students of that? I hammer it pretty hard right at the beginning of the course that this is how many hours you need to set aside to work on this course. It's in the syllabus. It's in my first announcement that I post to students. It is in my syllabus quiz. How many hours should you be spending each week? So really trying to set up that expectation early that this is what you have to be doing. And I haven't looked up the Canadian law on this, but it is U.S. federal law that in the U.S., if an institution is getting federal money, like your students are getting federal financial aid, for instance, then that is the law for every hour in, 2 hours out. So I tell students, I have to do this. Otherwise, I'm violating federal law. You don't want me to violate federal law, do you?
Absolutely not.
Right?
Yeah, I think another part of the PR, or just maybe the logic that students don't get, is that my revisions at the end of kind of the module revisions are worth double points than the initial answers that they are turning in. And yet they should be putting 80% of their time into the initial, right? Because it should, at the time that they revise, it should just be tweaks. It's clarifying what they didn't understand the first time. It's sharpening their understanding, or they're conveying their knowledge the second time after they've heard from other students. It should even be, they can probably cut words out of their answers to make that more clear. And yet it doesn't feel like that should be rewarded. It probably feels like that those 7 hours that I'm putting in are mostly on that front end, and I'm only getting half the points for that. And then I'm getting, more points for less work on the other end. It really doesn't. I suspect that Sue's probably, that's what it's what students are thinking about, is this just cost me too much time. And it's more of an expectations thing. But at the same time, for some students, this does come up where they just don't understand why all this work up front would not be rewarded as such. So, Catherine, go ahead, Sue.
It's an interesting way to think about it, Garth, because I never thought about it in those particular terms. I have had students who have said that their goal very specifically was to try and get the answers as good as possible on the first draft, so they don't have to spend any time revising.
Yep.
And I just haven't had any sense of students thinking differently between the points up front and the points later on. Especially, I guess I'd never thought about it. I don't recall any student mentioning it, because for me, all the points come at the end anyway. So I'm not scoring the first draft when the first draft is submitted. I'm scoring it during the final revision.
Okay, and that's where we're different. I'm scoring it. It's I'm reading this book called Specifications Grading right now. I'm going to show it to you. Oh, I can't show it to you. But I'm reading this book, and what I realized was, this is specifications grading. It's pass fail. It's you do these things, meet these criteria with the initial answers, and if you do, you get full points for it. And they are finding out, so they turn theirs in on Sunday, and by Tuesday they know, and they should know ahead of time, but they know what they've scored there. So, Catherine, how are you grading that initial submission? I
was I think I slacked on. I got a bit behind at the very end of the semester, but for the most part, I was grading them pretty quickly. So even before they would have the discussion, I would have graded that first one. And it was very much based on a good faith effort. So even if it was worth less points than the final submission, it was a fairly easy way to get points, because you just had to show that you had really tried properly. It wasn't whether it was right or wrong. But then some of them were frustrated that I wasn't giving them more individual feedback, and I had to sort of remind them about what the point of this is in the whole process. But can I go back to something else? I'm curious, because I think was it in the Boyce and Highline article about interteaching that they didn't have them submit a first draft the way they describe it, and I think they just said that we just handed out the questions at the beginning of the discussion session. And I'm curious if either of you have ever tried it that way, or how you came to this method of like doing the first draft of the questions.
What happened to me, so in the traditional form of interteaching, you give the questions in advance, students prepare answers, and in some cases, they're not even turning in initial drafts. They're just given the questions. And then the students come to class and they discuss. Different instructors handle that differently. Students have to have an entrance ticket. They need to have something written on paper, typed on paper when they walk in the classroom. This was 15 years ago, when it was more common for people to walk in classrooms with paper. So how Garth and I do this is definitely a little twisted, and I'm going to blame Eric Landrum for that. So Eric Landrum at Boise State has been talking for a number of years about what employers are wanting out of college graduates. And he has pointed out that the one skill that students learn in college that no employer wants is how to take multiple choice tests. So I had got it in my head that I've had many conversations with students about their multiple choice test scores and how they were approaching questions. And I found myself in my office hours teaching students how to take multiple choice tests. And after hearing Eric give this same talk several times, it took me 4 or 5 times of hearing him say this for it to finally sink in that I decided I don't need to do this. So when I switched to interteaching, I thought, these questions are really good. if I don't say so myself. I really like my questions, and students are producing really good answers. So why don't I just let students revise and treat this like a take-home test? So when I first switched to Interteaching and I switched to this modified way of doing it, I decided that I would hold on to my multiple choice tests for a little bit. I wasn't quite ready to give them up. And after a couple terms of doing this, the correlation was very strong that how students were doing on those revised questions was correlating very strongly with how they were doing on the multiple choice exams. And I thought, well, then why am I still doing multiple choice exams? They're not adding anything else. It's a skill that students aren't going to need once they're in the workforce. So why don't I let that go? And let's have the students get some practice in reading their textbook, in writing coherent answers, in focusing on questions that are being asked and addressing all parts of the question. That's really where students need practice. So that's how it is that I came around to being where I am now. I listened to, Garth, you're going to help me, Anna Ropp's interview with the person who wrote the article
on online interteaching.
On online interteaching.
Yep.
And I'm blanking on her name, and so my sincerest apologies.
Gaiman.
Oh, thank you so much, Catherine.
I don't remember her first name, but I think it's Gaiman, her last name.
That's fantastic. So that means that you're going to have to attend all of our podcast sessions, all our podcast recording sessions.
To remind us.
Yes, to remind us of things that we should know.
Yeah.
So in that interview, she was talking about, Dr. Gaiman was talking about how they did their particular research to find out that, interteaching in online courses is beneficial. And ultimately, it came down to how students performed on a multiple choice test. So for a lot of people who are doing interteaching, they are using it simply as the questions and student responses to the questions as a pedagogical approach to get to students performing better on multiple choice exams. And for myself, I tossed out the multiple choice exams and said, why don't I just have students revise and we'll treat it like a take-home test.
Yeah. Catherine, how does that sound to you? And I'm just noting while we're talking that the community college level, it may be different than your upper level courses. Some of the skills that we're developing in 100 level intro psych, not that students don't need those skills, but they may have some of those by the time they get to you. Although I imagine that if you told your students to, hey, come prepared for discussion, that maybe not all of them would have done the reading. So here's the question, or here's a question, which is, is this an issue for your students? The whole preparation, because I think the question is, will students come prepared if you just ask them to come prepared, or do they need that check and that check-in?
Well, I have another plan for the readings. I'm going to use perusal for the first time next semester. And I sort of was thinking, can I use perusal and do interteaching? And I think I can. And so I'm ditching, mentioned I had those weekly multiple choice quizzes to make sure they were engaging with the readings as well as doing the questions each week. But I'm ditching those, and I'll have them interact on perusal. So they'll be engaged in the readings that way. And that was why I was thinking a little bit, well, maybe I don't need to actually have them write out answers to the kind of longer discussion questions before they come, because they will have already engaged with the readings on perusal.
This is kind of the cool thing about interteaching is you can really tailor it. You can take the basics of it and really tailor it to your students in so many ways. Hey, I know we're running up against time here, and there are probably many, many things that we could discuss. Catherine, was there anything else in particular that is kind of like a burning, nagging question about interteaching that you wanted to talk through today?
No, thank you. Those were really my two biggest things. And I really appreciate the time you've taken to chat with me and have me here to discuss all this. It was really interesting. And I'm really excited now to think about all this some more.
So you're going to check back in with us in April or May and let us know how it went?
Sure, I'd love to.
Excellent.
Well, that's awesome. Catherine, it's our pleasure. And we want to thank you for taking the doing the bold thing and coming on a podcast and having this conversation. We do love having these teaching conversations. I know you do too. That's why you go on those Sunday runs with your colleague to talk about these things. And so thanks for doing this, and best of luck as you begin your semester. And I look forward to chatting with you again soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks.